Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our very first podcast, the first of many of The Subconscious Healer. I am your host, Dr. Gabe Roberts, the Subconscious Healer, and I'm a psychosomatic physician, originally trained as a chiropractor and as well as a functional medicine doctor, as well as an energetic practitioner of various forms of energy healing. My latest endeavor of psychosomatic work is based on the premises that people can develop physiological illnesses of various kinds, everything from ulcers to chronic autoimmune conditions and even cancer, based on the root cause of repressed emotions. And that has been my endeavor for the last several years. And going in and helping people resolve these conflicts, usually relating from some kind of adverse experience as a childhood trauma, things like that. We've helped people resolve a number of issues when all other approaches, including both conventional medicine and alternative medicine, um, fail to do so. And I know this from my own journey, being a functional medicine doctor with a practice in Kansas City for a decade, specializing in, I was a diplomat in nutrition. So we worked heavily with getting people eating right, understanding organic foods and the difference between conventional farming and organic farming and the nutrient quality necessary and avoiding things like toxins and pesticides and herbicides, as well as lifestyle interventions, stress management, breathing techniques, and getting their body, their nervous system into a more healing set, and to getting the body more acceptable of healing was our biggest goal for 10 years. And what we found was there was a small percentage of people that had a long-term resolution from these kind of interventions. However, a majority of them would unwillingly, unintentionally, unconsciously sabotage themselves after 6 months to a few years of implementing these new techniques within. And so my wife and I, Tiffany, were both troubled. My wife Tiffany and I were both troubled with this, understanding that no matter what we did, it seemed like after a period of time, all our results would kind of fizzle out, and our patients would just kind of go back to their old way of being. And of course, this is supported by various literature, various research, as well as confirmed through several interviews I've done with dozens of doctors through the years of functional medicine and naturopathic medicine, and asking them, off the record, perhaps sometimes, do you notice these patterns with patients? Do you notice that, yes, they come into you, they have, let's say, diabetes type 2, or they have a weight problem or something, and you are using natural approaches, safer approaches, supplements, things like that to help um, initiate, help remove the blocks of what's preventing healing from happening and initiate a healing response in them. Do you notice that all too often the results are just kind of either short lived, or they hit a plateau, or there's continuous backslides, and getting them to the state where they are fully healed, fully whole in mind, body, and spirit is more or less just something that it doesn't happen as often as you'd like. You see repeated backslides and a tremendous amount of failure on the attempts of this. Again, unconsciously, unintentionally. It's not like the people are doing it on purpose. Usually they're paying out of pocket because these kind of approaches are not endorsed by insurance. But do you notice that the results are just not there in a majority of people? And overwhelmingly, the results were the same. Yes, people concurred with what I was witnessing in my own practice. To quote a functional medicine doctor in New York, she said, yes, something is missing. And this is despite our approach in functional medicine of using what are called functional lab tests. very in-depth testing to see, what's going on with the microbiome, what's going on with their brain markers, what's going on with their gut, what's going on with, are there heavy metals involved, and hair analysis, is there adequate stomach acid, those kind of things. Is there adequate gallbladder functioning? What about thyroid? All of these different things. Are they sleeping good? How's their cortisol? All of these different things that fall under the umbrella of functional medicine testing, there was still something missing. And that was the case in not only my situation, but many other doctors as well. And so that has been my life's work, is to find what is that missing piece. And what I have found is um, there is something in their subconscious mind that's preventing them from accessing that healing state that they want. They are attempting to change the external environment while the internal environment remains the same. And throughout this podcast, I'm going to go into details on what those are. I'm going to share with you my own clinical experiences, what I have found, and give you more details on the mind, how the mind works, how the subconscious works, um, in tremendous detail, probably more than you're going to get from other sources all at once. So my my goal in this is to remove as much suffering as possible and to empower people to see what's possible when they remove the veils of trauma. Okay. Whenever people remove the veils of trauma, their entire life begins to change. And as we go through this and we start to understand what our self image is and how the lens of how we view our reality and actually create reality begins to shift once we understand that some of the big lies that we ourselves are governed by. One of the things is we think we are our memories. Okay. So whenever we have a memory occur, especially between the time in utero, between the time when we are first conceived until about 5 years old, what many degreed professionals don't understand, what I've learned through years of regressing over 5,000 patients, is these are without a doubt our most powerful memories that influence us, even for decades. So we are under the impression that our memories are real and our memories are us. So whatever happened to us, we interpret that as being us, like something we deserve, something that, let's say, if we're a child in those early years between, 2 to 3 or 4 years old, and something really bad happens, an argument in front of our parents, or we get left somewhere, or um, even more devastating, effects that we can talk about, sexual abuse, boundary violations, those kind of things. If they occur to us in those ages, children always take it very personal and they will interpret those events, those experiences as, oh, this something bad happened. It must be because I'm a bad person. And this is just one side of the coin here, where they suddenly develop a lifelong sense of shame that follows them for decades. So that's been my endeavors, to help people shift their perceptions about who they are. And when they realize how powerful they are with their own mind, with their own thoughts, with their own feelings, um, their illnesses will permanently resolve themselves, and many times with minimal, if any, supplement use at all. So that's been my whole life's work, is to realize that, hey, if we're patching things up, so to speak, if we're one of these people that are taking handfuls and handfuls of supplements just so we feel okay, uh, we are not okay on a deeper level. And it's only a matter of time before a whack-a-mole type pattern begins to emerge, and suddenly we're taking more and more supplements and they're no longer working, and we're trying, heavier artillery, maybe IV nutrition, whatever it might be, all in an attempt to just get us to feel better. There's definitely something that our subconscious mind has that's unresolved. It's what I call a self mutilation program, and we'll go into more depth on later episodes of that. But for now, one of my purpose today is to address this issue. One of the biggest lies that we have been conditioned to believe is that our mind and matter are not the same. They're completely different. So that's my purpose today, is to kind of address this, and for us to get a good start of this. I think the quote from pioneer anthropologist Louis Leakey, he once said, "Without an understanding of who we are and where we come from, I don't think we can truly advance." And I agree. I agree with that completely. So one of the biggest questions that people around the world, people in our nation of the United States, people around the globe, especially in North America, with the last several years, 2020 events on, one of the biggest questions people are pondering is, what is happening in the world? What is going on in the world today? Um, and we're seeing massive amounts of fraud. We're seeing things to where anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder, nervousness, are just growing conditions, especially in our youth, because of this field that we're all carrying these uncertain feelings within. And we are all one and the same in some aspects. We are much closer entangled than we've led to believe. And whenever I say things like the mind and matter are the same, and how things like childhood trauma can, lead to rheumatoid arthritis, or multiple sclerosis, or autoimmune conditions, or even cancer, it is difficult for a vast majority of people to grasp that concept. Maybe part of them goes, well, it kind of makes sense. A majority of people, I'd say maybe in the 65 to 70% range, it's kind of a new thing for them to hear that. Usually they're been conditioned on the older model of thinking, it's genetics. It was my mom that had this. My mom was a diabetic. I'm a diabetic. That's just the way it is. And this kind of understanding, whether it's diabetes, whether it's whether it's alcoholism, whatever it is, these kind of understandings that we've been conditioned to believe are not only enslaving, but they're the foundation of them is on this the foundation of these things themselves are on such a false premises that needs to be met head on. And we need to understand our true essence. We need to understand a little bit more about who we are and what we're capable of doing when we engineer ourselves correctly, when we think about things differently, when we understand that our emotions and our feelings have a tremendous impact on physical matter, including our life, including our physical body. Um, this These are examples that people need to start to realize, to understand that it's not just genetics, and it's not just family traits and things like that. It's that we are literally reality makers. Another question that is coming from people is not only what is happening in the world, but what can we do to make it better? And um, that's my whole idea for this. That's my whole uh, envision for this. My whole goal is to show people, well, if we're going to make it better, if we're going to make ourselves better, and we're going to make it better for our kids, start to make the world a better place, we have to understand a little bit about who we are and where we come from, just like Louis Leakey had um, inquired about. So, another great quote that is very relevant to this kind of matter is Nikola Tesla. He said, "The day our science begins to study the non physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than the previous centuries of existence. And perhaps that decade is upon us." Uh, that is that is very important to me. We're literally looking at um, just tremendous amount of chronic health conditions in our children and people. People I talk to that work in hospitals and nurses and things like that are just seeing a huge overwhelm of chronically ill people, and there has to be a shift. Our science today, we need to understand first off, our science is hijacked. There's a conflict between duality system going on between an old dogmatic belief and a belief that actually uses the scientific method of inquiry, reason, investigation, and then changing things and applying new things based on evidence. And this conflict right now that we're all presently seeing uh, involves this dogmatic belief system masquerading as science, and it still masquerades in our universities. It definitely masqueraded in my chiropractic college, and some in my functional medicine practice, practices and extracurricular activities. It still plagues that, and that is that it's a materialistic view that everything is solid and it's a predictable pattern of how things work. And this dogmatic materialistic view is the dominant one in our world today. It dominates the governments, it dominates all the educational systems, it dominates all the healthcare practitioners, all the services, the all the authorities when it comes to research are dominated by this. So that's why, that's one reason why we're in this big mess is because we are still influenced and heavily constricted and restricted is a better word by this old dogmatic belief. This dogmatic belief is the materialistic world, like I mentioned, but it also is mechanical and it has to do with cause and effect. Cause and effect. Basically, if there is going to be an effect, we have to have something causing it. In other words, if there's something going on with your body, you have to have a medication, you have to have some kind of substance to create that effect. Now, it could even be a placebo, which is another interesting topic itself, but we need something to cause that, versus being able to cause it out of nothing, being able to cause an effect or create an effect out of nothing. That's something that escapes the mindset of many people. And that's where I want to go with this. We first must address that mind and matter are one and the same. Okay, mind and matter are one and the same. Now, for documented history, 6,000 years easily, all the way back to Plato, it's been very difficult for wise people and authorities and respected philosophers and teachers to convey the message between mind and matter, between spirituality and our physical body. It's been a very difficult task for that. And most of the reports and investigations and the records from all of those dating back were rather flimsy until Rene Descartes' time. Rene Descartes, of course, was born in 1591, and he's a notable, brilliant mathematician and philosopher. And one of the one of the things he wanted to do by age 25 was have a system, a reproducible system, like a scientific um, system in place to where it would explain everything about the universe. And why he was putting this together, he came up with brilliant contributions to mathematics and algebra, and his contributions to these sciences are still in large part in play today. Rene Descartes is the one who said, I think, therefore I am. And as he was working on this mathematical, algebra based science that was based on predictability and certain laws of the universe that work certain ways, he also came upon he also came upon a problem where he noticed that the human mind was its own separate entity. It seemed to not work within this laws of predictability. It seemed not to operate within the realm of where mathematics and things like that did. And this troubled him. So he was responsible for creating this duality system that still is contributing to this belief system that we still are influenced heavily by today. Rene Descartes said that the mind does not work with these mathematical laws. So the mind is God's instrument. Um, and science is the instrument of, physical matter. And this caused a split, a duality. So from that point on, it was the religious jurisdiction of mind, where everything that had to do with the mind and thoughts and all that became under the umbrella of religion, where they would start to look at things purely from a mind standpoint, purely from the non-physical standpoint, purely from things like imagination, daydreaming, perception, all of those things, prayer, all of that fell into mind with no interaction whatsoever with physical matter. Now, science, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. It was everything that had to do with physical matter with no interaction of mind whatsoever. So they were completely separate entities, almost like black and white. Um, and of course, this continue on, this duality system continued for centuries. And even, other people that had come along, scientists began to uh, observe this and verify it with their own findings. They started to understand that, hey, yeah, mind is separate. That's religion's, jurisdiction. But the physical matter over here, you drop something on the ground, you drop a small pebble in water, you get ripples every time, as long as the water itself isn't frozen, you're going to get the ripples every time. And those ripples are always going to behave a specific way, no matter what, if it was 50 years ago or if it was 200 years ago, the ripples would behave that way, dropping a pebble. And it's just that kind of physicality stayed the jurisdiction of science, where mind was never thought of as something that interacted with that or, um, was even remotely close. This kind of system of this duality I'm talking about, where mind and matter are separate, still is what's present today and what plagues people today, what makes people feel enslaved at a very, very deep, unconscious level. To where if they have something going on, part of them thinks, well, why bother? Why bother doing anything? It's just the way things are. It's just the way things have always been. I was born this way. My mom had it and I had it. So it can keep people enslaved, disempowered, because there's a deep, deep belief system within them that mind and matter are separate. And of course, this continued for centuries. And then we have Isaac Newton, of course, who came along and originated what we would be called as Newtonian physics, um, which was just a more solidified version of predictability, things like dropping a pebble in water and getting ripples. But these had to do with more matters of, an object in motion stays in motion, an object at rest stays at rest. And he solidified these rules, Isaac Newtonian physics, and it basically furthermore strengthened this duality system. So that has been the dominant um, belief system that still reigns today, is this duality. And in order for us to understand that mind and matter are actually not separate, but they're one and the same, some kind of radical shift would have to take place. Well, that radical shift has already taken place, and it took place starting in October of 1927 at the Solvay Institute. Is where a tremendous amount of 18 scientists got together, all with the intention of studying the fundamental particles They wanted to understand more about the atoms. They wanted to understand more about what's the world around us and how things operate. Now, of these 18 people, Madame Marie Curie was the only woman, but you had people, um, Eschenberg or Schosberg. You had Albert Einstein. You had Max Planck, the father of quantum physics. These people, 18 of some of the most brilliant minds in the world, all got together at the Solvay Institute in 1927. And when they got there, the old understanding was that atoms were actually solid particles. Atoms were solid things. Atoms were the building blocks of the entire universe, and they were like little puzzle pieces or little bricks that when you start stacking them together or pushing them together like puzzle pieces, they start to form the larger things that we see, the molecules, the bigger building blocks. If you look at this from a biological standpoint, you build the atoms up, the atoms become the cells become the tissues, um, tissues become organs and organ systems, and then organ systems create an organism. Okay. So, with the smallest fundamental piece of everything in our universe is made of atoms. And up until this point, atoms were looked at as solid objects, like little puzzle pieces. And what these 18 brilliant minds did was, as they started to investigate the atoms, expecting to see little tiny bricks or little tiny puzzle pieces or little tiny solid objects, what they realized was as they looked deeper and deeper and deeper, they became very fuzzy and non-defined and almost like a little cloud that as they peered into this cloud, like picture a little storm cloud, a dark little cloud. As they peered into this cloud, looking deeper and deeper, just there was nothing there. So they realized that it was mostly space and all of the understanding of the protons and neutrons and things like that, they were still there. They were still present, but not in the way that they had always assumed. They noticed that these behavior of this subatomic world was completely unpredictable. So it was nothing like what the Newtonian physics model had influenced, had said, had taught up into that point. And once they started to observe this cloud, they noticed that rather than behaving in a predictable way, it was completely sporadic, unpredictable. These electrons started to just kind of appear and disappear at will. They gained mass and lost mass at just random, unpredictable ways. And then they realized that just them observing, they would see something appear and disappear. And they started to really investigate the behavior of this and the behavior of light. And of course, this is where Albert Einstein's famous equation E equals mc squared comes in. Most people have heard that. It's a very famous It's a very famous equation that comes from Albert Einstein. E equals mc squared. Well, what that means is energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. So when you think of energy up until this point from the Newtonian physics model, energy was just the capacity to do work. That's what I was taught in chiropractic college. That's what everyone's practically taught if you take a course in mechanic or physics or anything. Energy is just the capacity to do work. Energy is like pushing a block. You have to push a cement block, 2 feet. It requires a certain amount of joules to do that, right? That's energy. Um, and it wasn't taught anything else. It was just taught it was the capacity to do work. Well, with this understanding of energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, that means everything that you see mass wise, whether it's a cup you're drinking out of, whether it's the automobile you're driving in, whether it's the house you're standing in or standing nearby, whether it's the tree that you see outside, whether it's the ink pen in your hand, everything made of mass, including our physical bodies, is actually made of light moving, uh, light particles moving with such a high velocity that it appears that they're still, that they're solid. Okay. Mass times the speed of light squared. So that means everything has a movement to it. And whenever they look into this movement, they found that this light behaved not in a solid way, but in a shifting way. It could either be a particle, like physical substance, like something that's really there, or a waveform, which is more like something like the breeze blowing through the wind blowing, okay, or a radio wave or light waves. It could either be a wave or a particle. Particle would be something, and I said solid, but what I mean by that is something that has a mass to it, something that you can actually touch, something that, like a pebble dropping in um, a pond and you get ripples, that is a particle falling into something else that's similar to a particle. They're on different vibratory rates, but they're both vibrating. The pebble's vibrating and the water's vibrating. So, but you watching that, observing that through, your eyes and seeing the light come off of it so you can actually witness that, the light that's allowing you to see that is not particles, it's actually waveform. Well, this contradicts everything from Newtonian physics. Well, how can something behave like a wave or a particle? And even more intriguing was these scientists recognized that as the more they peered, they noticed that particles began to form every time they looked for it. Every time they observed, a particle appeared. This means they were actually influencing what was taking place within the very vision of their eyes. So every time they would look for something, a waveform would collapse into a particle. Something would go from nothing into something. And this not only changes the relationship between energy and mass, but it also changes the relationship between mind and matter. This means that mind and matter can no longer be separate, can no longer be looked at um, two separate entities, but actually one and the same. And even Max Planck, uh, no, it was John Wheeler who said, John Wheeler, one of these famous people, one of these very brilliant quantum physicists, said um, that we are no longer able to say that we're observing a universe. We are actually participating in a universe. This means that we are all makers of our own reality. This means that we are all, without knowing it, oftentimes collapsing particles, forming substance, formless substance into a substance just by our intention, our thoughts, and observing things. So this means that we have a tremendous amount of power that up until this point has been uh, has been held from us, has been not um, taught by the mainstream, has not been something that everyone is able to get a textbook and read and uh, your normal academic settings. And what I mean by that is, I graduated as a chiropractor in 2014, and anything talking about energy healing was considered dogmatic. So that's how much our uh, current educational system still views these things as um, perhaps pseudoscientific. But that's what the real science says today. And it ushered in an entirely new field of science called quantum physics. And quantum physics, according to one of my mentors, Dr. Bruce Lipton, is the most valid of all science today. It's accurately answers a lot of the questions that we've asked for years that Newtonian model was unable to do. So, my whole purpose in today's podcast is to just let you know that mind and matter are one and the same. And as we go deeper into these episodes, I'm going to show you some really striking examples. I'm going to share with you some examples of how our mind creates things on a deeper level, how our subconscious mind is the most powerful goal achieving agency known to humanity, And if we understand that part of us and we start to work with it, we start to gain harmony with it, everything in our life can begin to change. So until next time, thank you for listening today. And um, I'm looking forward to having some more episodes of this, sharing this information for you. And I wish you all have a wonderful day.